I remember the day it all changed. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. The soft, final sound of my mother's last breath. My father, a man who had always valued success and strength above all else, seemed to shrink overnight. He didn't just lose a wife, he lost his anchor. And in the vacuum she left behind, he turned to the one he believed could fill it. Me. He always said I was his legacy. Clara was different. She was all soft edges and gentle words. A teacher who measured her wealth in the love of her students, not in dollars. I was a litigator in the heart of downtown, closing deals that made headlines, my name a byword for ambition. We lived in different worlds, separated by more than just the miles between our Chicago lofts and her quiet suburban home. We were separated by his expectations. When he called us to the house that weekend, the air was thick with unspoken grief and the smell of old wood polish. The will was read, and it was just as I expected. The house, our childhood home, was left to my father, but with a clear directive. It was to be passed on to the daughter who was most capable of managing the family's assets and legacy. My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a familiar pride. I saw Clara's face fall, a silent understanding passing between us. She knew. She always knew what he thought of her. That evening, as a cold rain lashed against the windows, Dad found Clara in the garden, watering Mom's rose bushes. "You're just a teacher, Clara," he said, his voice hard, yet laced with a weary finality. "Leave. Your lawyer sister owns this house now." I was standing in the doorway, and I heard every word. A part of me, the part I kept locked away, felt a twinge of something like shame. But the bigger part, the one that had fought for every victory, felt a rush of vindication. I had won. Again. Don't miss the next chapter of this story. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a thing. Clara called me later that night. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tremor beneath the surface. "He said I was just a teacher," she repeated, the words a raw wound. "He said you own the house." I dismissed it, of course. "He's just grieving, Clara. You know how he is. He's proud of me. That's all." It was a lie, and we both knew it. He saw her teaching career not as a noble pursuit, but as a lack of ambition, a waste of potential. He saw me as a testament to his own drive, a reflection of the success he had always craved. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal documents and phone calls. I took over the family finances, the stocks, the real estate portfolio. I was in my element, negotiating with brokers, organizing spreadsheets, and making strategic investments. I even drew up the papers to transfer the deed of the house into my name, a purely symbolic gesture that felt like a coronation. I saw Clara less and less. She stopped answering my calls, and our text exchanges became curt and infrequent. The family dinner we had every Sunday with Dad became a strained affair. Clara didn't come again, my father would say, a hint of annoyance in his voice. "She's always so busy with her students." He said it like an excuse, a way to dismiss her absence without having to acknowledge the chasm he'd created. I didn't push it. I had everything I wanted, his approval, the legacy, the house. I had won, and the silence from her was just proof of my victory. I moved forward with my plans, a new condo in the city, a high-profile case I was about to close. The house in the suburbs became a project, something to be renovated and flipped for profit. I hired contractors, an interior designer, and started to gut the place. I was erasing the past, replacing the worn floorboards and fading wallpaper with something new, something polished and modern, just like my life. My life was a perfect picture, framed by success and ambition. My cases were high profile, my clients were influential, and my social calendar was packed. I'd occasionally get a text from Clara, usually about some minor family detail, a cousin's birthday, Dad's latest doctor's appointment, but they were just formalities. The easy, comfortable conversations we once had were gone, replaced by a polite distance. I ran into her at a coffee shop one afternoon. She was with a friend, and she looked different. Her eyes, once so open and trusting, now held a guardedness I didn't recognize. She smiled politely, but it didn't reach her eyes. "How are you?" I asked, my voice a little too bright. "I'm fine, Maya," she said, her tone cool. "Just busy with the end of the school year. The kids are putting on a play." "Right, the play." I tried to sound interested. but my mind was already racing back to a brief I had to file. "Well, I hope it goes well." "Thanks," she said, and then she turned to her friend, her laughter returning as they talked about something I couldn't understand, something that didn't involve me. It was a world I had traded for my high-stakes, high-stress life, a world of small, quiet joys. The demolition of the house began. I'd drive by, seeing the familiar walls torn down, the rooms I'd grown up in now just exposed studs and piles of debris. A part of me felt a pang of nostalgia, but I quickly pushed it away. This was progress. This was what success looked like. I was turning old memories into new profit. My father didn't comment on the demolition, but I knew he approved. He would call and ask about the progress, the new fixtures, the expected sale price. He was more engaged with the house as a financial asset than he ever was with it as a home. My career was at its peak. My name was on the cover of a legal magazine, and I had just won the biggest case of my life. My father called, his voice booming with pride. "That's my girl," he said, and I felt that familiar, intoxicating rush of validation. It was everything I had ever worked for. That night, as I lay in bed, the city lights twinkling outside my window, I felt a strange emptiness. The thrill of victory was fading, leaving behind a hollow quiet. My phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Clara, a photo of her in the front row of a school auditorium, a proud smile on her face. Her students were on stage, bowing after their play. She had a happiness in her eyes that was genuine and effortless, a kind of contentment I didn't recognize. It was a silent message, a world away from my world of champagne toasts and power lunches. The next day, my father called. His voice was different. He sounded strained. "I need you to come to the hospital, Maya." He had had a minor stroke. He was shaken, not by the event itself, but by the sudden fragility of his own body. He had always been so strong, so in control. In the sterile hospital room, looking at him so frail and pale, I saw him not as the powerful figure he'd always been, but as a man suddenly confronted with his own mortality. He didn't mention the house, or the stocks, or my latest case. He only talked about our mother, about how she used to make him tea when he was sick. He talked about her garden, the one Clara was still tending to. It was in that moment that I realized my ambition had cost me more than I thought. It hadn't just created distance between me and Clara, it had created a distance between me and my father, a chasm of unspoken regret. I had been so busy chasing a legacy that I had forgotten what a legacy really was. Not money or property, but memories, love, and family. This is just the beginning of Maya's journey. Don't miss out on what happens next. Subscribe to the channel now and make sure to hit the bell icon to get all the updates. My father's recovery was slow. He was home now, but a different man. The pride in his eyes was replaced by a quiet pensiveness. He would sit for hours, looking out the window, his mind a million miles away. He rarely mentioned my work or the house. He only asked about Clara. I would call her, but she would say she was too busy to visit. "I have papers to grade, Maya, and a school event." Her excuses were polite, but firm. She was creating a new boundary, one I hadn't seen coming. My father would sigh, a sound of profound loneliness. I, the lawyer, the successful daughter, was left to care for him. I scheduled his appointments, managed his medication, and tried to fill the silence with talk of the news, of anything to avoid the topic of the one person he truly wanted to see. One rainy afternoon, I was at the house with the contractors, trying to salvage some of the original wood for a rustic look. I went upstairs, into what used to be my parents' bedroom. A single, small, framed picture was left on the bedside table. It was a photo of a young Clara and me, holding hands on the front lawn, our faces beaming. We were just kids, not a lawyer or a teacher, but just sisters. I picked up the photo and a piece of paper fell from behind it. It was a note, in my mother's familiar, elegant handwriting. "My dearest Clara," it read. "I know your father may not always understand your path, but remember, the most valuable things in this world are not what you build, but who you lift up. Your heart is your greatest asset. Keep teaching. Keep loving. That is your true legacy." I stared at the words, a cold dread creeping into my stomach. This was the directive. This was the one my father had ignored. He hadn't seen it, or he had chosen to ignore it. He had twisted my mother's words, her intention, to fit his own narrative of success and ambition, The note was a turning point. It felt like a punch to the gut. All my life, I had believed I was fulfilling my destiny, living up to my father's expectations. But the truth was, I had been fulfilling his delusion, not my mother's legacy. My mother had seen something in Clara that I had dismissed, that our father had ignored. She had seen her strength, her capacity to care, her quiet power. I called the contractors and told them to stop all work. "Just leave it," I said, my voice shaky. The for sale sign stood in the empty lot, a monument to my greed and a physical manifestation of the empty promises I had made. The truth was, nobody wanted to buy a property with a history of family conflict, a story of grief and betrayal. The house, or what was left of it, was a toxic asset. It wouldn't sell. My father asked what was happening with the house, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. "It's on hold," I'd say. He'd nod, a flicker of something in his eyes, a dawning realization, perhaps. He was starting to understand that a victory won at the cost of your family isn't a victory at all. I went to Clara's house one evening, unannounced. The porch light was on, and the scent of freshly baked bread filled the air. She opened the door, her expression a mix of surprise and caution. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She hesitated, then stepped aside, letting me in. The house was warm and full of life, filled with the clutter of a happy family. Kids' drawings on the fridge, a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table. It was the antithesis of my pristine, sterile apartment. It was a home. I sat down, and for the first time in my life, I couldn't find the right words. I, the lawyer who could argue her way out of any situation, was speechless. Clara waited, her silence a gentle but firm demand for honesty. I handed her the note. She read it, her eyes welling up with tears. The tears weren't for the words, but for the silent truth they contained. The truth that her mother had seen her, had valued her, when no one else in the family seemed to. "I'm so sorry, Clara," I finally managed to say, the words a bitter pill. I was so focused on what Dad wanted, on what he thought was success, that I didn't see what was right in front of me. Clara took the note and carefully folded it, placing it back in the photo frame. "It's not just about the house, Maya," she said, her voice soft but clear. "It was about him pitting us against each other, making us compete for his approval. He made you believe that my success, my happiness, was a threat to yours." I confessed everything to her. The guilt, the shame, the emptiness I had felt even in my moments of triumph. I told her about the demolition, about the empty lot, about how I had ruined our childhood home in my quest for power. She listened without judgment, her face a mask of quiet understanding. "I don't know how to fix it," I said, my voice breaking. Clara stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the night. "You can't fix it, Maya. Some things can't be rebuilt, but you can start to build something new." I realized then that she was the strong one. She had weathered his rejection and my betrayal without becoming bitter. She had chosen to build her own life, her own family, on a foundation of love and kindness. She had been living our mother's legacy all along, while I had been chasing a ghost. This is a pivotal moment for Maya. Will she be able to change? Find out in the next chapter. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications to follow the rest of this family drama. The day after I went to Clara's, I went to my father's. He was sitting on the porch, a silent, solitary figure. I didn't say anything, just went to the back and started working on the garden. It was a mess, choked with weeds and dead leaves. Mom's rose bushes were still there, barely clinging to life. I spent the whole day there, my hands sore, my knees bruised, the physical labor a form of penance. My father came out to sit beside me. "What are you doing, Maya?" he asked, his voice soft. "I'm trying to save it, Dad," I said, looking at the withered rose bushes. "I'm trying to save Mom's garden." He was quiet for a long time. "I made a mistake, Maya," he said, his voice a whisper. "I was so worried about providing for you two, about making sure you were successful, that I forgot what it meant to be a family." "I know, Dad," I said. "I did too. We didn't talk about the house, or the inheritance. We talked about my mother, about her love for roses, about the way she used to sing while she gardened. He told me stories I'd never heard before, memories that had been buried under years of ambition and pride. The following week, I called my law firm and took an indefinite leave of absence. My partners were confused, but I didn't care. The big case I had won, the one that had been the pinnacle of my career, was starting to unravel. The client, a powerful corporation, was facing a huge scandal, and my name was tied to it. The press was circling, but it didn't matter. The money, the status, the recognition, it all felt meaningless now. The empire I had built was crumbling, and I was too exhausted to try and hold it up. I just let it fall. It took time, but we started to heal. Clara and I began to talk on the phone every day, not about work or family drama, but about life. We talked about her students, about my father's health, about our own fears and hopes. We were building a new kind of relationship, one based not on competition, but on mutual respect and love. I sold my apartment and moved into a small house not far from Clara's. It was a cozy place with a small backyard, and I started a garden of my own, a small plot of roses. My father, with Clara's help, was getting better. He was seeing a therapist, finally confronting the grief that had festered inside him for so long. He apologized to Clara, not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet, heartfelt confession of his own faults and a plea for her forgiveness. She gave it to him freely, because that was who she was. One day I got a call from a reporter from the legal magazine that had put me on its cover. "We're doing a follow-up story on your firm's recent scandal," she said. "We'd like to get your side of the story." I politely declined. My reputation was in tatters. The law world I once dominated, now a place I had no desire to return to. The money I had made was dwindling, but I didn't care. I was discovering that true wealth was not measured in a bank account, but in the people you have in your life. The empty lot where the house used to be stood as a constant, stark reminder of my past mistakes. I had a choice. I could mourn the loss, or I could learn from it. I was finally learning. My life was no longer a perfect picture. It was messy, complicated, and full of imperfections. My law career was a thing of the past. The money I had accumulated was almost gone, spent on bills and a life that was far less extravagant than before. I was now a freelance consultant, a far cry from the high-powered litigator I used to be. But for the first time in a long time, I was happy. I was no longer the successful daughter. I was just Maya, the sister who had finally come home. The rift had been mended, not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent acts of kindness and forgiveness. Our father was still frail, but he was surrounded by love. He had his daughters back, and he knew now that was the most important asset he could ever have. I watched Clara's son run to her, a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. "For you, Mommy," he said, his face a perfect picture of adoration. The love in her eyes as she took them was a kind of beauty that no amount of money could buy. I finally understood what my mother's legacy was, what true success meant. It wasn't a house, or a title, or a victory in court. It was the simple, profound act of being present, of choosing love over ambition, of lifting others up. It was the kind of victory that lasts a lifetime, the kind that money can't buy, and time can't take away. I had been the villain in my own story, and the consequences of my ambition had been painful. But from the ashes of that conflict, something new and beautiful had been born, a real family. Thank you for watching this powerful story about family, love, and forgiveness. If you were moved by Maya's journey, please subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends. Your support helps us tell more stories that matter. See you in the next one.